Hi, I'm Julie Ross,
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
and you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
And look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging to say the least. But with a few skills under our belts, we just might be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Parenting Horizons podcast. As always, it is I, Greg, and of course, Julie is here as well. Julie, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. The weather's beautiful right now. I mean, I don't know what it'll be like by the time this airs, but
People are listening to this.
yeah, but here in New York right now, it's crisp and cool and really beautiful.
And a little sunshine. That always helps
Yeah.
a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for everyone for joining us. We have another excellent guest today, and today we're going to be talking about teaching your toddlers to speak. And our guest today is Tala Hershey. She is a speech language pathologist practicing in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. She is the owner of the Hershey Therapy Practice, a pediatric private practice serving New York and Connecticut, as well as Hershey Speech and Language Coaching, extending its coaching services to parents worldwide, which is great. Tala, thanks for being here today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so before we jump into this, I'm sure we'll have a lot of parents that are interested in this. Can you talk a little bit about your history, your journey, and sort of how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Oh, how much time do we have?
Let's say we have all the time in the world. Take your time.
So I've been practicing speech pathology for about a decade now. I opened my private practice about 5 years ago, and actually COVID was sort of planted the seed for this coaching that I've been doing. And so what happened, I'll start at the beginning. My private practice is traditional speech therapy, one-to-one. Kids come in, we see them, it's wonderful. It's, exactly what I want to be doing. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the whole world changed. It's sort of like the turning point for like everything in the world.
Right.
But when COVID hit, I had to take my whole practice online. So if you're a 2-year-old getting speech therapy with me during COVID, it had to be virtual.
Oof.
And anyone who's listening who has a toddler out there, you know that no toddler is going to sit and stare at a screen, especially me on a screen. I don't take any offense to that, but they're not staring at me on a screen for 30 minutes. And so I had to sort of shift how I approached my therapy. So what I started doing was I would have parents put the computer sort of in a place where I could see the whole room, and they would put out toys that their kids wanted to play with. And they would put headphones in, like AirPods, so that I could see what was going on and I could hear what was going on. But what would happen during the session is I was in the parent's ear. So I would give the parents real-time feedback. Say this, let's try this strategy. Let's, do it this way.
Interesting.
And what started happening was the kids who got speech therapy this way, this sort of like new revamped way, were discharged in a few months.
Wow.
Versus the kids who were coming to me one-on-one for, a half hour, an hour a week, maybe. They were with me for at least a year.
Now, do you think that's connected to the child's comfortability with the parent? And so they're more relaxed?
Yeah, I think there are a few components to that. I think that's a big one. Nobody knows their child better than their parents. I have a 3.5-year-old, a 1.5-year-old at home. I know them better than anyone. I think it's partly that, and partly because I couldn't be in the room, the parents had to be me in the room. And so they had to learn these strategies if they wanted their children to get speech therapy. And what starts happening is when you learn how to do it and you learn the right strategies and techniques, you can't unlearn them. And so parents are using them all day long now. They're using
Makes
them
sense.
at the grocery store, the school pickup, you know, wherever they are. And so these kids are starting to get speech therapy like 70 hours a week versus the half hour, 1 hour that they're coming to me.
So I'm
Yeah.
assuming you must have kept this as part of your practice, right? Since it was so much more effective.
Yeah, so parent coaching has sort of always been a part of the early intervention approach to speech therapy. There's always been a little bit of parent coaching. You know, the parent sits in on the session, but sessions are short. And if you actually want to, if the parent wants you to be hands on with the child, you only get like 3 to 5 minutes to really
Mm,
train the parents. So I did. I started this coaching program after this that was just strictly coaching, which was really cool because with my speech therapy degree, I can do one on one speech therapy where I'm licensed. So I'm licensed in 4 states. I can practice in 4 states.
hmm
But with this method of coaching, I can now reach parents in places that have a year long wait list,
Right.
or their
Wow.
child didn't qualify, but they still need therapy, or the nearest speech therapist is an hour away for a half hour session. I can reach these parents and teach them how to do it. So
That's
that's sort of what
wonderful.
planted the seed for where I am now.
I love that.
I guess there's a couple of things that came out of COVID that were worthwhile. That definitely sounds like one of
Exactly.
them. Um,
A few.
well, let's just jump into this. I mean, there's a lot of ways to get into it. I was kind of looking. We talked about some talking points, and one of yours to start with was: do we need to be explicitly teaching our toddlers to speak, or is that something that just you let that sort of organically happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's a question that parents struggle with when I'm talking to parents, because the advice that you get a lot of the time from well meaning people and your pediatrician is just wait and
Mm,
see what happens. But the truth is, if your toddler is not meeting milestones by around, 18 months or so, you really do need to start explicitly teaching them. And this is more common than I think parents realize.
mm.
And some kids will pick up language naturally, just, on their day to day. But some kids really do need that explicit teaching and that what I call a jump start in their
Mm.
language to sort of get them going. Yeah,
And what
I
is
do think
the
so.
I mean, you just mentioned 18 months. So like at what point does a should a parent say like, something's going on here? And like you said, I'm sure it's different from kid to kid. And is there a time where like a parent should say like, wow, this really isn't happening and we might need to get some help?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's sort of a gray area, specifically when parents should reach out, but there are milestones, and there are milestones for a reason. Milestones are based on normative data. So if a toddler is 18 months and they're really not saying anything, then I would start putting a red flag up, start keeping an eye on it, maybe start reaching out. Um, the gap between 2 years old with toddler language, 2 years old and 3 years old, is so significant that if a toddler is not catching up by 2, 2.5, they really should have some sort of intervention,
What
because
when
between
you
2 years old and
yeah,
three,
what does that mean? The gap, like it just accelerates so much between those
it
ages?
accelerates so much. So by 2 years old, you should really not be able to count words anymore. A lot of parents keep a list of their kids' words. You should really not be able to count by two anymore. And they should be starting to put two words together, or at least on that trajectory. So I tell parents, they're not going to wake up on their second birthday putting two words together if they weren't before, but we want to see that they're on their way there, because by 3 years old, we're looking at full sentences,
Mm.
hopefully. So that it's just a drastic change between 2 and 3. And I would say around 2 is when I get the most parents reaching out to me.
And when you mentioned doing a jump start, what does that look like? What does that sound like, for a parent?
Yeah. So it's not, uh, teaching your toddler to talk is not really as daunting as it sounds, but you do need the right tools to do it. And um, I think I hate to say it so bluntly, but I think that parents are getting really bad advice
Mm.
online.
Oh, probably.
You mean like a
Yeah,
parent is struggling and before they come to someone like you, they might like just Google like, "Hey, my kid has delayed speech. What do I do?" Is that what you're saying?
exactly. How do I teach my toddler to talk? How do I get my 2-year-old talking? The first few things that are going to come up are narrate all day to them. Just keep talking. Tell them everything that's going on. Narrate your day. Read to them constantly. Those are probably the top 2 things that you're going to read, you're going to see, you're going to get Google results for. And so then I get the parents that come to me that say, I talk to them all day, I read to them all day, and nothing's changing, because those are not specific speech strategies. Those are like a one size fits all, um, not for a toddler who needs a little bit of intervention. And so, what intervention looks like is it really could just be a few changes in how you approach language. But I do talk to parents, and the first thing that I teach parents who come through my program is this mindset shift, right? What we were doing was not working. That's why you're here, right? We can all admit that. We can come to that conclusion. What we were doing wasn't working. Let's figure out what to do instead. How do we get this to work for you?
So, I just have a question. So, I have 3 kids and I don't remember any of them really having any real delays or anything. I guess my question is, what are some of the things that will delay a child's speech? Because I don't know. I'm assuming sometimes it can be obviously more serious, like maybe a child is on the spectrum and that's delaying it. And sometimes is there just a natural delay? Like some kids just take longer than others. Like when someone walks into your office, how do you determine like what's at stake or what's going on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a number of factors that we take into account. So I'll break down language a little bit and quickly, not to like bore everybody listening, but there's the umbrella of language, and then there's expressive language and receptive language. So expressive language is how you express yourself, what you're saying, how you're saying it. This can be sign language. This can be approximations of words for toddlers, like words that sound like words. This can be actual words. That's expressive language. Receptive language is their understanding of language. Do they understand what you're telling them? Do they understand new words? Do they understand when you say, let's go get your shoes, we're going outside, or, at a certain age? But do you know that your toddler understands you? These are the 2 main factors that we look at. There's also a pragmatic social skills component that we look at. Do they enjoy engaging with peers? What are their play skills like? Play and language are inextricably linked. A child's play skills and their language skills go hand in hand. We look at that as well. So the toddlers that come through my program is really fit for a toddler who is what we call a late talker. And a late talker is a toddler under around age 3 who only has expressive language concerns. So there are no concerns receptively, no concerns with pragmatics, only expressive language. And these are the toddlers that I say sometimes just need a jump start.
So
These are the
they're
toddlers.
under when you say receptive, they're understanding what's being said to them. And
Mhm.
when say again, what is expressive language? You're saying they have that.
No, they don't quite have the expressive part. So these are the toddlers parents come to me and they're like, my toddler understands everything, but they're not speaking yet.
Okay.
These are what we call late
And
talkers.
what's pragmatic again? Could you explain for our listeners?
Yeah, yeah. Pragmatics and social skills go hand in hand. So it's eye contact, joint attention. Do they look at the same toy you're looking at? Their
Got it.
attention skills, their play with other children. All of those are taken into account also. So when you say, how do we figure out what yeah, get to the bottom of their language difficulty. For a toddler with just expressive language difficulties, these late talkers, I hate telling parents this, but sometimes it's just idiopathic. Sometimes it just happens. It's not the fault of anyone.
There's nothing you
It's
can do. They're
not
just late talkers.
it just It's just what happens. And these are children who, once they get that jump start with the right tools, the right strategies, they'll take off.
And what percentage of the toddlers that come to your practice fall into that category?
So my private practice, that's a good question. I get a mixed bag in my private practice.
Right.
In coaching, these are the toddlers that I really work with, the late talkers, because a toddler who has more concerns, receptive language concerns, they're not understanding you, these pragmatic concerns, those are toddlers I would refer to specific one-on-one intervention for more of an intervention
Mhm.
Mhm.
than what coaching can provide.
Mhm. Gotcha.
Right, so you when they come into your office, you I'm assuming, like, you kinda go through, like, just you have a conversation with the parents to be like, "What's going on?" And so then you can make your determination on, what are you gonna do moving forward as, like, a program for the child?
Exactly. So a toddler would come into my office. I would do an evaluation. So I would talk a lot to the parent. I would observe the toddler playing. I would observe their
Hmm,
expressive language skills. Are they using any kind of expressive language, sign, talking, babbling, anything, any sounds? And I would look at their receptive language as well. Are they understanding the directions that I'm giving them during play? I would take all of this into account. And the one thing I will say about speech therapy that's important is whether your toddler has a diagnosis of something or not, a genetic diagnosis, autism diagnosis, whatever diagnosis, we treat the language regardless of the diagnosis. So it's not like a toddler comes in and they have an autism diagnosis or a Down syndrome diagnosis, and they're treated differently than
hmm.
another toddler who has a receptive language, expressive language delay. It's all treated exactly the same, regardless of the diagnosis. And we, as speech therapists, or I should say speech pathologists, it's pathologists because we can diagnose speech and language disorders. We cannot diagnose genetic disorders or autism or any neurological disorders. That is not within our scope.
So
That
you
makes
refer
sense.
them out if you feel that might be going on. B
Exactly.
but it also sounds like you're basically saying you meet the child where they are. You don't think about
Exactly.
whether. Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
We meet every child where they are, whether it's through coaching. I have a lot of parents for coaching that come to me say, my toddler's not interested in speaking. They're stubborn. They're just not interested in repeating me. So, what are they interested in? Let's take a step back and figure out what they are interested in, and we're going to build it up from there. Same as in therapy. We treat the child that walks in the room.
Right.
You mentioned sign language before. Do you think that, and I'm not talking about children who are hearing impaired, but a lot of parents will sign to their children, hungry or full or that kind of thing, as part of language acquisition. Do you find that that's a helpful thing or not?
Yeah, that is the first thing I will teach a toddler who walks into my room. The first thing I will teach a parent to do for their toddler. Sign language is so effective, and you don't need to know every sign. You don't need to be proficient. You need to know like three or four baby signs. That's
Yeah,
it. But what sign language does is I'll explain a little bit about gross motor and fine motor skills. Sign language is a gross motor skill. You use your hand. It's a gross motor skill. Speech and the muscles that you use to speak is fine motor. It's a fine motor activity. So these gross motor skills, these bigger movements, precede fine motor skills. That's
Mm,
why all of these nursery rhymes have gestures and movements. And if you're watching like some super simple song on TV, whatever it is, they have all these actions because kids are going to imitate those before they start speaking. So, what sign language does is it does not detract from speaking at all. What it does is it gives your toddler an immediate and effective way to communicate with you because they can come up to you and sign more and you know exactly what they want
got it.
without because they don't have the skills to speak yet. So sign language is so incredibly effective.
That's great. That's great to know.
And at some point, will the child, though, just stick with that? Because it sounds like what you're saying is like, and I've never even thought about that, but that makes sense with like nursery rhymes that they have these movements. And you're saying that the movements can help sort of maybe generate the speech. And that's what often happens. Like, will a child, I guess it just depends, because I'm just wondering if, will a child just stick with the sign language because they don't want to speak? Or, I mean, it must be so, even as I'm thinking about it, it's like, it's gotta be so complex because 'cause I'm sure there's a bunch of different things going on, social, emotional, and then, like, what they physically are capable of or neurologically capable of. It must be a puzzle you're kind of figuring out with each child.
Well, I think you bring up a really important fear of parents with sign language is that a lot of parents do fear that their toddler will rely on sign language. They won't use their words, they won't speak. In reality, we are always pairing the word with the sign. So every time we sign more, and you can't see me who are listeners, but I'm signing more here, I'm always saying more when I sign more. We're always providing that language model. And quite frankly, it's much easier in the long run for kids to speak. So they're gonna speak,
Right, right, right,
right?
right.
So these parents and like what you brought up, it's true. It's a big fear of parents that they just might not want to speak or they might be a little bit stubborn and not want to speak when in reality it's going to be much easier for them to speak and they're going to start realizing that and then they'll drop the sign.
Yeah, I
Uh,
would imagine even with kids and, like, when they're socially, like, they probably do mostly wanna fit in and learn to speak as well, I imagine. I'm sorry, Julie, were you gonna say something?
oh, I was just gonna ask Tala if, like, the if there's a component occasionally, or maybe more than occasionally, where toddler doesn't the toddler is given everything that they want without having to ask for it, and or they have an older sibling who just talks for them.
Hmm?
Is there
Yeah.
is that a part of some of the puzzles?
Yeah, you guys are bringing up everything that parents come to me asking, so this is great for parents. I'm gonna take that apart for 1 second. There is only anecdotal evidence that having an older sibling that's talking for you will cause, and I use cause in quotes, a late talker.
Mhm.
There's no research to support it, but you will see anecdotally that younger siblings maybe talk a little bit later. But the whole thing with a little bit later is it's still within the normal range. It might just be at the later end of the normal range, which is why there's no research to support that that's actually a thing.
Right.
And remind me what your second question
Oh,
was.
so the other one was, is there a component sometimes where the child doesn't have to talk, doesn't have to name what
Yes,
they want
yes.
because they're just the parent intuits it and kind of gives it to them without being asked?
Yes, thank you for repeating that. My memory is terrible. Um,
So smile.
so we get into a rhythm with our kids. We just do. I know what my 20-month-old wants pretty much all day long.
Mm,
And it is easier at some point to just give it to them.
Yeah.
And what another piece of really bad advice, sorry, parents, bad advice that
Mm,
parents are getting is to withhold an item
mm,
until their toddler tries to talk or says something. If they want a cup, you're going to make them say cup or make them say something before they get the cup. And this is probably the least effective way you can teach
mm,
language.
mm,
And parents often fall into this because how else do you get your toddler to talk, right? But
right.
this is forcing them to talk. And this is, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this because that can be an entire other episode where I can just stand up on my platform and talk about this. But um, when we are learning to teach our toddlers to talk and we're learning the right strategies, we're creating situations that encourage speech where your toddler wants to talk, not where we're forcing them to talk. Because the more pressure you put on it, the more force you put on talking, your toddler is going to break down. And I will bet
Mm,
for any parent listening who has tried this with their toddler, they've held the cup and they've made their toddler say something to try and get the cup. I'll bet all of my money that your toddler's first instinct is frustration
Mm,
or getting upset, walking away, giving up, right? Because it's too much pressure.
mhm,
Mhm.
Talking needs to be fun. It needs to be something that your toddler wants to do. And so, what I teach parents are ways to incorporate language learning and encouraging them to want to speak rather than withholding objects. So, it's a very long winded answer is yes.
mm-mm,
I think we do get into a rhythm with our kids. We do know what they want. It's much easier to give it to them. But how do we backtrack from that? And that's what I help parents do because withholding items is going to get you nowhere. I mean, think of it if every time I wanted water, I had to like do a quadratic equation or something. That's awful. I would just stop drinking water. Like I would just
Right.
give up. It's the same thing. You don't want it
Yeah.
to happen to you, and you don't want your toddler to get frustrated either.
So
Yeah.
we've kind of you kind of just touched on a couple of these things, but part of what we wanted to address with you was, well, two things. You talk about three things every toddler thrives on to feel successful, but then you also talk about the ways we actually may be hindering our toddlers from talking. So let's start with hindering, because you already just mentioned this idea of like this demanding kind of thing doesn't work. That's really specific. Is there anything else that comes to your mind just right now that you would think of is something that parents might do that's hindering to the development of their child talking?
Yeah, withholding items is a really big one. There are a whole, and I have a whole list somewhere of like do's and don'ts for teaching your toddler language. One thing that a lot of parents do, and I'll be honest, I am a speech pathologist, I am a toddler mom, and I still find myself doing this, is saying, say this, say cup, say hi. Can
Mm.
you say hi? Can you say bye? Telling them what to say. And again, I'll bet all my money for all the parents out there listening who have tried this, their toddler doesn't say anything. When you
Mm,
say
Right.
hi or can you say hi? Right?
Yeah.
All we have to do is model for them what you want them to say, how you want them to say it. So when you open the door, someone rings the doorbell, you open the door, your toddler's standing there with you. Hi, hi. That's it. You just model the word and that's it. So, one thing I really want parents to start to become conscious of is not saying say or can you say.
mm,
That's a big
Excellent.
one.
yeah.
Excellent.
And the withholding items is another really big one. Yeah.
Right. So it sounds like you're really working in tandem with the parent, obviously. And it also sounds like your new system from COVID sounds excellent because, like you said, first of all, it's the parent is doing the work because you're kind of talking to them in their earbud.
Hmm.
And then they have those tools, like you said, now they're getting 70 hours a week of speech work based in your kind of ideas and practice, but it just sounds so much better because they're also learning the tools, right? They're learning them in real time.
Exactly. And it goes in every situation in your life because it sort of is a lifestyle shift. And that sounds dramatic. I don't think it's quite a lifestyle shift, but you shift your behaviors. So you learn things like don't say. And that way, when you do open the door next time, you don't say it. It's different than a parent who's in my session one to one in my therapy room where they're learning how to, set up a play scene for 5 minutes and model language, this specific language that I teach them during that play time.
Mm,
Whereas most parents, including myself, I don't have like a half hour or an hour to set aside to teach language. It has to be part of your everyday, it has to be part of your routine. And if you change just a few ways you approach language and you make it, I always tell parents, you learn these strategies in your bones. You can't unlearn them.
mm.
Then you're doing it all the time. And
Mhm.
that's a different approach. Then your toddler is supported, their language is supported all day long.
And Greg, you had said that there was I mean, we just talked about hindering, and this is where my memory is faulty. Uh, um, what was the other? It was something about what can we?
Yeah, yeah, and you've kind of touched on this already. I mean, you've said a few things, but you know, is there anything else that a parent can do to create an atmosphere so the child will thrive and be
Right.
successful? And you kind of already talked to you've given some specific rules, like you can't say this or make demands. Is there anything else that creating a successful environment for your toddler to speak?
Definitely. So another thing that I teach parents all the time is routine. Parents have routines for their toddlers for the most part. They have a morning routine, they have a lunch and nap routine. But putting the routine on paper and actually using a visual schedule for your toddlers love routines. They might not like it at first, but it makes them feel safe. It makes them feel they know what to expect, they know when to expect it. And if you put it on paper, and I have examples of actual visual schedules, but you can go on Amazon, or honestly, I make it on a Word document, a visual schedule. And the way I create them for my kids, and I use them all the time with my kids, is you put the routine on one side. So brush teeth, go potty, put on pajamas, in bed. Say that's your routine. You have pictures of their actual items on that page. So their actual toothbrush, their actual toilet, their pajamas, their
Mhm.
bed.
Hmm.
And then what I do with my kids is I have a Velcro picture of their face, and they get to move it down as they complete the task.
Wow.
And this gives them control. They
Hmm.
know exactly what to expect. And you can teach so much language just from this one page that you've created within your routine. So toddlers really thrive on routines. I love visual schedules. It's not something you need all the time, but if, we're on a school break or we come back from a vacation and routine is like sort of out the window, you revert back to it. It's amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, and Julie, you don't believe you've talked about that idea, schedule, routine, how important it is. And just as I was thinking, you've also talked, Julie, in the past, and I'm sure this is the same, that rewarding with some sort of present or prize is not helpful for behavior. So, Julie, I know you've talked about it before, and then Tala, I'd like to hear you whether that's like an effective, like, if you talk, you'll get
Yeah,
this transformer.
we're for the parents listening, we're all smiling and nodding right now,
Nodding
Yeah.
like,
agreeing with
"Don't
this.
do that."
I
But Julie,
am.
I remind me in our audience why you're so against, like, a reward-based thing for behavior.
Well, I for a number of reasons. One is that ultimately the system breaks down. It doesn't work because you say, "I'll give you an M&M if you do X, Y, or Z." It could be if you say, "Potty, I'll give you an M&M," and eventually the child catches on and is like, "Not worth one M&M. I want a whole bag of M&Ms," right? Because they're smart. I mean, they're smart. That's one reason I don't like it, is that ultimately it's set up for failure. Another reason that I don't like it is it leads to a sense of entitlement because, well,
Oh, for things that you think you just do as part of
you
life.
you
You talk.
you just go to bed, or
Yeah.
you just
You pee on the
why
potty.
why do I have to give you something for doing what just as
Humans do.
human beings do? So it leads to a sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to get something, which of course then
Mhm.
kind of holds the parents hostage. Like, unless you give me something, I'm not going to X, Y, or Z. And ultimately, I really believe it leads to a diminishment of self-esteem because on some level, kids know what their milestones are. They know that at age 5, none of their peers have mommy and daddy sitting with them to go to sleep.
Mm,
They just don't. And so they begin to think, what's wrong with me that I need to get a reward for something that, like, it seems like everybody else is doing.
mm.
So over time, I think it leads to a diminishment of self-esteem, of confidence in oneself.
Tala, did you wanna add anything to that?
Yeah, this is another thing that I teach parents immediately when they join my program is the intrinsic reward
Yeah.
with when it comes to language. And we want our toddlers to feel rewarded intrinsically, not extrinsically. So, just going back for 1 second to the withholding a cup, right? You don't want them to force, you don't want to force your toddler to say something in order to get a cup of water, right? Your
Right.
toddler should just be able to get water. But really, when it comes to language, and we all fall into this as parents. We're super excited. Our toddlers aren't talking, but then they say a word and you are just so excited and it
Yeah.
becomes like a whole party that they said a word and then probably your toddler's going to shut down again
Hmm.
Mm,
because it's too much. And so what we need to teach our toddlers is that cause and effect, that intrinsic reward, that you understand them. This goes back to what toddlers thrive on. They thrive on being understood.
mm.
So even just knowing that you understood what they said is enough for them. If they say water out of nowhere for the first time, give them water or repeat
Right,
back to
right.
them, water, here, water. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do for that intrinsic reward because then they're going to say, "Oh, that was really cool. Mommy understood me. I'm going to do that again and again and again." And it's that it builds their confidence exactly like you were saying, Julie, and it
Yeah.
makes them want to speak more, but it has to be intrinsic.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's great. I have a couple more things. I wanted to ask you only because so my one of my kids had a lisp that interestingly we didn't totally hear, and I think she was in 5th and it was a theater teacher. Like she was doing an after school camp and she came home from school and she was like, Mimi says I have a lisp and I have to get, and it was interesting because then we really started to hear it.
Mhm.
And, we did take her to a specialist and she's worked on it. And so I guess my question is this something that you do?
Mhm.
And at what point it kind of came from her, and I think maybe if it becomes a social thing, like maybe if the child is getting made fun of. So I guess my question is this something you deal with? And at what point should a parent, address it?
Sure.
And do kids grow
So,
out of something like that just as they grow up and, develop?
yeah, sure. So, we've been talking a lot about let me take a step back. My title is a speech language pathologist. We've been talking a lot about the language portion of that,
Mhm.
getting toddlers to talk, what to do to get your toddler speaking. This falls into the speech category, and speech is how you say your words, what sounds you're using to say your words, the actual movements that you're making with your mouth. That is well within our scope. It's a lot of what I do in my private
Mm,
practice. There are also milestones for speech sounds. They're called phonemes, and these sounds that we say. And if your toddler isn't meeting those milestones by a certain age,
mm.
then I would always recommend intervention. But like you said, it's very common for parents to not even realize it with their
Right.
own kids because they're your kids. You understand them, right? And so it takes someone from an outside perspective looking in, being like, oh, I don't always totally understand them. And then you start realizing it. You're not like me who sits and watches TV and my husband's going to kill me every time I'm like, oh, that person has a lisp and that person. And he's like, I can't watch TV with you anymore.
For sure.
So so it's the same idea, like, if there's milestones that aren't being met, like we did, then she met with someone and it was helpful and it's gone away, and although now she's in high school and recently she was like, "Guys, I think my lisp is back because my friends were making fun of me," and we're like, "Okay, I don't think so." But it's so funny you say that because I had also I'm a actor director and I'd put her in a bunch of stuff like commercials and short films. And it was just funny to go look back and I could hear it immediately. But both
Mhm.
my wife and I, and it wasn't severe, but it's definitely there. Um so yeah, I was just curious that it sounds like in your practice you handle both of those things. And it's
Oh,
probably the same
definitely.
thing. The child comes in, you do an evaluation and then you set up a program to address it.
Exactly. And articulation looks very different than what a language session would look like. Articulation, in all honesty, regardless if it's a 2-year-old that comes in, and there are articulation things we work on with toddlers 2 years old, or a 15-year-old that comes in, it really is drill work.
Hmm.
But for a younger toddler, it's masked by a game or a
Right.
something.
Right.
For a 15-year-old, they can probably sit and do the drills, but what articulation is it's muscle memory.
Hmm.
So it's like learning an instrument. If you're learning it incorrectly, you have to relearn how to make that sound. So if there's a lisp and that's the only, for 10 years she's had a lisp, she just has to relearn where to put her tongue and relearn
Hmm.
that muscle memory. And it's sort of a use it or lose it. So it's like, if you're learning the violin, you learn the violin, but if you don't pick it up for
Right.
5 years, you're going to have to start again.
Right.
So why don't we end with, I just thought this was interesting, and how we address this. You have written, let's talk about mom guilt. And I would also just say dad guilt, parent guilt,
Yeah.
worry, and the stress that comes with a toddler who is not communicating like their peers. Like, do you have to do a lot of work with the parent too how do you deal with that? Because I'm sure it is unnerving, and like, I don't know, maybe it starts to call, and depending on the parent, like, it calls into question, are they doing something wrong? Like, how do you deal with that portion of it? And I guess, Julie, I'd be curious to hear it too, because I'm sure whether it's speech or not, you have parents coming to you that have their own sort of dread and anxiety and self-esteem issues based around where their child's at. So, Tala, why don't you start? Like, how do you think about that piece of this?
Yeah, I hear it all the time. I live it all the time. Again, I have 2 toddlers at home. It is, I would say, physically impossible as a mom to not feel guilty about something that your toddler is doing or not doing. And so when you have a toddler who's not talking, but their cousins are talking the same age, or their siblings talked at the same age, or their friends are, it's impossible to feel like it's not your fault, right? And for a lot of parents, almost all parents, it's not your fault. Sometimes,
Mm.
like I said before, it just happens. And so I actually had somebody come to me. I don't remember who I was talking to, but they said, parenting is the only job that people have where there's no handbook. They don't tell you, you don't have anyone to really turn to. There's nowhere to turn, you have to figure it out on your own, and you need to know as a parent when to reach out for help when you need it. And so parents listening to this episode, who tuned into this specific episode, the
Right.
parents who are googling, who are on Facebook, who are on Instagram looking for strategies, you're doing the right things. It's exactly what you should be doing. It's not your fault, and you might need to just reach out for help. And that's a lot of what I tell parents is, maybe they do need a jump start. Maybe they don't need a jump start. But the worst that happens is you reached out for help, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
so I
I've worked with
really,
Yeah, yeah. I've worked with Julie long enough. The thing that gets repeated often is parenting is the hardest job in the world. And any other job, if you want to be an architect or a lawyer or an engineer, you go to a doctor, you go to school for
Mhm.
years and years and years and years. And this idea, I mean, I'm just basically saying it's ingrained in me too, but that the idea that you can wing it as a parent, like, there's no
It's
shame in
unbelievable.
and
Yeah.
there's no shame in going to get help. Um and so, Julie, I know I just said it, but can you speak to that? And also, I feel like you talk about often that it's important for the parent to get a hold of themselves a little bit, as opposed to, like, the child's struggling too. But if you have your own issues and esteem or whatever insecurities you're dealing with, that it's important for the parent to get a hold of that in their own way
Hmm.
before addressing the issue with the child. So I don't know. Can you just speak to all of this a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the guilt never goes away, no matter how old your children are.
Yeah, I'll bet.
You know, I mean, I've got a 31-year-old and a 36-year-old, and you still feel guilty. Now, I think the older they get, the more you can talk yourself back from that ledge of guilt. You can, because we can kind of reason with ourselves and see that other life events have happened for them. But I think it's a kind of inherent in, I hope it's inherent in fathers too, Greg.
Mm,
My experience is that it's the mothers who reach out for help
mhm.
as opposed to the fathers,
Yeah, yeah.
that the fathers are like, "Don't worry about it, it's fine." I don't see the guilt as much in the fathers, and I think the guilt is what causes people to reach out and seek solutions, or one of the things that causes them to do that. So, I mean, I don't mean to throw fathers under the bus, but that's just
Well,
my
you've seen it for years and years.
I've seen it for years and years, and I'm really specifically talking about, cis het fathers, as opposed to trans fathers, or gay fathers, or the LGBTQ kind of community. But I have seen it for years. I think it's really important. Guilt can be a motivator, but guilt can also be a block for people. And I think you need to really recognize what, are you feeling guilty and it's immobilizing you? Because then that's not good,
Mm,
right? And that's where you need to talk to yourself, or talk to a friend, or talk to a therapist, and talk about the guilt that you're feeling and why you're feeling that amount of guilt about something that really you don't have a lot of control over. Children are human beings. We can't control every aspect of their lives as they grow up. We can't control every aspect. So we need to think in terms of, how can I set them up for success, as opposed to, I must have done something wrong, and therefore this is irreparable. Instead, I think it's about that positive slant. How can we set this child, this adolescent, this late adolescent, up for success?
Yeah, I think just to piggyback off of that for a second, it's important for parents to realize that whether n- it's important for parents to realize whether their guilt is impacting just them. You mentioned if it's immobilizing,
Yeah,
um, if it's really impacting just them, or is it really impacting your toddler? Is it
yeah,
impacting
mm,
you from getting them help, from reaching out for success? And I see this all the time, and sort of rightfully so, with parents that get a new diagnosis, or news that really is sort of life changing in a way for their toddler. um, and you have parents who are sort of in denial about that, which I see all the time.
mm,
And you
mhm,
have parents who do go ahead and get the help, and they get the help that they need, but the parents who are in denial about it are not being the best advocates for their toddler. And
right,
so it's important to really take a step back, and your job as a parent, we talk about your parent, how many hats can you wear as a parent, but your job is to advocate as best as you possibly can for your kids, for
yeah,
everything.
100%, 100%.
that's great. So we do this at the end of every episode. We have this kind of expansive conversation, and someone has just listened to this whole conversation. We've covered a lot of topics. I mean, Tala, if there is there one thing in particular, if you can, that you feel is most important to keep in mind when we're talking about, you know, your toddler learning to speak?
Yeah. I would say first and foremost, we didn't really touch on your gut instinct, but a parent's gut is very, very effective. If you are getting the advice of just wait and see, just wait it out, and your gut is telling you, I'm not sure about that, just reach out and ask. Just ask for an opinion. That's all it is. Ask for an opinion. You'll be happy you did either way. Either the nagging feeling in your gut will go away, you'll hear, no, they're fine, you don't need to do anything, or you'll set them up for success and get them help. So always, always, always follow your gut.
Yeah.
Great. That's a great place to stop. Again, our guest today is Tala Hershey. So, Tala, if someone wanted to find you, what is the best way to do that?
Sure. My Instagram is at Hershey Speech Coach. You can find me there. Um, I'll also leave a guide for parents, a quick, step by step what to really do to get your toddlers talking guide. But yeah, you can find me mostly on Instagram.
Great. And we'll make sure that's in the show notes when we send this episode out. And Tala, this has been wonderful. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much for having
I
me.
really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
We'll see you next time.